But this one is a little different than the previous ones that we've been looking at. So the first two ethical theories we looked at, deontology and utilitarianism, there was something very rational about them, right? Applying some sort of abstract moral rule to different situations, to figuring out what the right or wrong action in that situation would be. Then we looked at virtue theory, which was kind of a departure from these views. Whereas those views tried to give us an argument for what they thought made an action right or wrong, what did virtue theory do? How was it different than those theories? What did virtue theory focus on? Not so much determining what is right or wrong, but yeah.
How to be a moral person.
Right. How to develop the kind of character that you need to actually carry out moral actions in your life. Bless you. We're making kind of a return in this lecture today towards trying to answer the question of what makes an action right or wrong. Although today we're going to be looking at the ethical theory of the ethics of care, which is a feminist ethical theory that was developed by Virginia Held and Nell Noddings in the late 1900s, who saw kind of the state of moral philosophy and the state of philosophy generally, and they thought it was missing the female perspective. Obviously, if you've been paying attention to the ethical theories that we've looked at so far, they've just been written basically by old dudes. Virginia Held and Nell Noddings, who pioneered this ethics of care, thought that moral philosophy was missing a feminine dimension to it, or the female perspective. So we're going to be talking about this feminist ethical theory today.
She's still alive?
I think one of them is still alive. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'll try to get that information until your next class, but the focus of this ethical theory is going to be a little bit different. As I've already said, it's going to contain a certain feminist angle to it, the female perspective on what actually determines the morality of an action. But another thing that's important to note about it is that it focuses less on rational analysis and more on developing certain emotions and the ability to interface with others in social relationships. Another way to phrase that is, instead of placing a huge importance on rationally analyzing different moral situations, it's going to be focusing more on us developing our social intelligence to know what the needs of people are, and then to best try to meet those needs. In one easily digestible sentence, this philosophy, this ethical theory, focuses on attending to and meeting the needs of those for whom we are responsible. It's all about relationships, this ethical theory. The ethics of care recognizes the importance of relationships to human life, and it recognizes that we have some sort of moral obligation not only to cultivate new relationships with people, but to show up in the relationships that we are already in. Therefore, it's going to focus on attending to the needs of people, trying to meet the needs of people through our relationships with them, and it's also going to ask us to try to cultivate more care and compassion and relational intelligence. When we looked at Kant's theory, what role did he think emotions should play in doing the moral action? If you could summarize it. Did he view emotions positively or negatively? Did he think possessing a certain emotion would help you in doing the moral thing? Was it necessary for doing the moral thing? No. Why do you say no?
He says you should just be able to do it because it's moral, not because you feel like it.
Right. According to Kant, emotion really shouldn't play any part in the moral action that you decide to do. It's all about recognizing what the right thing to do is and then carrying it out of pure respect for the moral law. Right? Not so with this ethical theory. This ethical theory isn't going to reject emotion. It's not going to think emotion has nothing to do with moral actions. It's actually going to value emotion, and it's going to utilize it in determining what is right or wrong, rather than rejecting it like some of the more logical or rationally based theories of deontology and utilitarianism. The ethics of care is going to disagree with Kant. It's going to say, no, the moral action isn't one that's done with no emotion attached to it. The moral action, the right action, is one that actually does have a certain emotional charge. You ought to feel a certain way when you're acting, not be some cold, calculating, rational person who's just trying to do what's right because it's right. Similarly, instead of trying to apply some abstract, rational, logical rule that's applicable in every situation, you just apply the rule and then you know what's moral to do, like Kant's view, right? Just determining if your maxim is universalizable or not. It is going to be suspicious of applying these abstract, one-size-fits-all rules to moral situations. The ethics of care thinks that actually the moral action is one that pays attention to the context, that pays attention to the particulars of the situation. And so it is going to be suspicious of our ability to apply abstract moral rules, and it's going to say just applying a logical rule isn't going to tell you what the right thing to do is. You actually have to look at the particulars of the situation at hand. In this way, it prioritizes being partial in moral matters, not impartial, like Kant or Mill would have us behave. When I say that the ethics of care prioritizes being partial rather than impartial, what do you think that means? What does it mean to be impartial? Yeah. Not having a bias, right? Trying to view things objectively from a neutral standpoint, right? Not showing favoritism to one party or the other. The ethics of care rejects that way of engaging in relationships with others and trying to figure out what it is moral to do. It is not true, the ethics of care thinks, that we owe the same duty to all people. And I think an easy case for this can be made. If you have a kid, do you have the same obligation to that kid as you do a stranger? Most people would say no, right? You have more of a duty, more of an obligation to watch out for your child rather than meeting the needs of somebody you don't know, somebody you don't have a relationship with. In the same way, the ethics of care is going to say, look, what the moral thing to do is going to be sensitive to the kinds of relationships that we have and which relationships take priority over others. In this way, it says impartiality is not a virtue. We shouldn't try to be impartial when we come up against moral situations. We need to remain sensitive to the actual relationships that we have and what duties and obligations flow from those relationships. Make sense? Now, I told you earlier that the ethics of care is a feminist theory. Let me just talk a little bit about that. One of the key features of the ethics of care is, rather than trying to figure out what the moral thing to do is just through logical, rational analysis, the ethics of care explicitly bases itself on the experiences of women that these philosophers, Virginia Held and Nell Noddings, don't believe have been considered or really utilized in philosophy. EOC, by the way, is an abbreviation for ethics of care, if you didn't get that. As I've alluded to before, the ethics of care see not only philosophy generally as lacking the female perspective, but moral philosophy more specifically. And so a lot of what we're going to be discussing today can be directly connected back towards the particular subjective experiences that the pioneers of this theory have had in their lives, and on the experiences of women that they've known and talked to. Another important feature of this theory is that it utilizes what's called systemic thinking to outline social issues and to provide analyses in which they think care is lacking in our society. This is a particular way of doing philosophy that has become popular in the late 1900s up until through the present day. Systemic thinking is utilized in the philosophical fields of critical race theory, critical gender theory, queer theory. And this kind of thinking basically looks at society as a set of interlocking structures and systems that are formed by the norms that we have in society, our discourses, the way that we speak about things, the language that we use, and the actions and behaviors of individuals who have been conditioned to think and act in a certain economically useful way. Thus, it utilizes what is called in the philosophical literature systemic thinking. It is going to be analyzing social systems, the effects that social systems have on our thought and behavior, and it's going to level a pretty scathing critique of Western society and of the social systems that we have, which are producing situations in which people are not getting the care that they need, people are not showing up in the relationships that they're in, and which is producing ultimately social injustice. Does that make sense? Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to jump now into describing some of the fundamental elements of this view and what Virginia Held has to say in this piece. Okay, let's do it then. Obviously, because the ethics of care is a feminist theory, and it utilizes systemic thinking in analyzing society and spaces in which care is lacking, as I noted before, it is going to implicitly contain a critique of our present society. Things are not all hunky-dory, according to the ethicist of care. There are many areas in society in which care is lacking, in which relationships are suffering. There are lots of things that need to be fixed. One of the aspects of the ethics of care critique of Western society is a critique of what is called liberal individualism. Does anybody know what liberal individualism is, or classically liberal individualism? Anybody have any ideas? What does it mean to be individualistic? What does that mean? You're an individual, right? You're not 7 people in one person, right? You're one person. You're an individual. What does it mean if you're being individualistic? I'm going to wait until somebody responds. Yeah?
You do stuff like by yourself.
You do stuff by yourself. You're kind of focused on yourself, right? You're not so much worried about the state of society out there that you can't control, right? Your priorities are in a certain order. That focuses on developing your capacities, your knowledge, your economic goals, right? Liberal individualism is a kind of political view that the individual in society should be protected. The individual in society should be prioritized over the group. The rights of the individual should take priority over the well-being of social groups. But what's more than this is that the liberal individualistic view is basically this view about humans in Western society, which says that we are all independent, rational, separate, autonomous individuals. This way of viewing the human person is an artifact of the classical liberal political philosophy on which the U.S. is based, for example, which was spearheaded by John Stuart Mill, John Locke, the Founding Fathers, and thinkers like this. The liberal individualistic view basically says something like, everyone is a separate, rational, autonomous individual. Your success in society is pretty much based on your effort and what you do. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You have to work hard. You'll find success if you do that. And if you don't find success, it's likely because of something you did. The ethics of care critiques this view heavily. Not only does it not agree that we are all independent, rational, separate, autonomous individuals, but it disagrees that this is the proper way of looking at how one should behave in society. The ethicists of care argue that this actually is not true of society. We are all rather interconnected and interdependent on one another. We don't all live in our own separate vacuums where our actions don't have social consequences, where we are self-made people. The idea of the self-made person, the ethicists of care think, is a fiction. There is no ultimately self-made person, because all of our lives, all of our existences depend intimately on relationships that we have with other people and on social systems that we didn't create and that we're relying on. For example, you wouldn't be where you are today without your parents raising you. In this way, your success is dependent on a bunch of things that they did for you, right? Similarly, your success and your ability to live and go to this college is dependent on a bunch of social systems and a bunch of people doing a bunch of different jobs to keep the lights on so that you can have the opportunity to be here. Society is not a grouping of a bunch of individuals who are disconnected from one another. It is one giant system in which our actions have consequences and in which our current lives really base their success and are dependent on the actions of countless other individuals, even if we never meet them. Right? You wouldn't be able to make it to school today if people weren't making sure the roads were safe and that you could drive on them. You wouldn't be able to use a laptop without somebody coming up with that and building it. Right? In this way, we are all interconnected and interdependent on one another, and our success and our lives are based on these relationships that we often overlook and that we take for granted. Striking out on a different fundamental aspect of this view, the ethicists of care argue that this ethical theory is both self-interested and altruistic. In this piece, Held says that persons in caring relations are acting for self and other together. When you show up for your relationships, when you cultivate relationships, when you strengthen them and deepen them through acts of caring and compassion, you are not only helping the other person, but you're also helping yourself. You're developing your own capacities, you're strengthening or increasing your own knowledge. This ethical theory isn't just about meeting other people's needs. It also involves in some small way, meeting your own needs. And so in this way, it is neither self-interested nor completely focused on other people. It's supposed to be a combination of both. In your relationships, if you engage with them appropriately, you'll be helping both yourself and other people, making yourself and other people happy. Now, you're probably asking yourself, we've been calling this the ethics of care, we've been talking about relationships, but what does it actually mean to care for someone? So let me put the question to you. What do you think it means to actually care for someone? If you're going to base a philosophy around care, what does that mean? What does proper care look like? What's involved in it? What do you do when you care for someone? Yeah.
Making sure their basic needs are met.
Making sure their basic needs are met. Good. Is that all? Yeah.
Like if you know someone's going through a rough time, you go help them out and try to take care of them.
Comfort them, right? What were you going to say?
Helping them out with things they can't do on their own.
Right. Helping them out with things they can't do on their own, right? Like a little kid, they don't know how to cook macaroni and cheese, right? Or, if it's dealing with emotional trauma or something else. What else? Is care just about doing things for people? Is that all that care is? Is it just doing things for people?
It's also about them knowing that you're there for them.
Okay. Yeah.
But it says persons in caring relationship are acting for yourself and other together. So wouldn't that be in order to care for someone, you have to care for yourself as well?
Yeah, that's true. What's involved in that caring for self or caring for other, though? Beyond just doing things. Are you emotionally neutral when you care for someone? No. Why do you say no?
I mean, I don't know, it's just it can't be neutral because you're in a relationship with that person, so obviously you're going to have a sort of bias to automatically try to care or show some type of emotion towards them, especially if you get into an argument. There is no neutrality in there. It's either they're right or you're wrong and stuff like that. So
right.
I don't think there can ever be a neutrality in a relationship that is so-called caring or loving and healthy.
Right. Perfect. Yes. Caring is not just about doing things for people. Caring is a value and it's a practice. It's feeling a certain way about people and it is labor, doing things for them. It's not just about doing things for people. It's just not about saying, oh, I wish you felt better, but you don't do anything for them. It's both. It's feeling a certain way about them, having compassion for them, and actually helping them out. It's both. It's not just one or the other. Now let me pose this question to you. Your son doesn't like football, but you really love football. And you want your son to be a pro football player. So you force him to play football. Is that caring? What do you think? Yeah.
Well, it's not caring for your kid, it's caring for yourself.
Ah, okay. That's a good distinction. We would say it's not very caring, right? Generally. Forcing your kid to do something that they don't want to do that doesn't really add anything to their life, right? It would be different if you're like, Jimmy, you have to brush your teeth at night, right? That would be different than making them go to football practice, I think.
I think if there was a different viewpoint on why you wanted your kid to play football, that is be kind of caring because you're kind of forcing your kid to do something that's out of their comfort zone.
Sure.
But the example you gave is kind of thinking about yourself rather than about your kid.
Yeah, maybe your priorities aren't in the right place, right? You should be more concerned about your kids, developing your kids' capacities and their interests. I bring this up because care, according to this view, is not the same as paternalism. What is paternalism? What are you being, or what are you doing if you're being paternalistic? What is intimately connected with this word? What do you think of when you hear this word? Parenting, right? You think of parenting. What do parents do? What does it mean to be a parent? What does your parents do to you, for you? And how might that differ from caring?
Some parents could feel that it's like an obligation to take care of like kids instead of just doing it because they like want to.
Right, maybe they feel like there's an obligation to do it. They're not really motivated to do it. Like from the inside, right? Yeah.
Put like your like the kids before themselves, even if it causes some kind of self-harm. Whereas caring, like there's some sort of like self-preservation, like built to a certain point.
Oh, that's interesting. It's kind of the opposite view I would have expected somebody to take, but I think there's some truth in that. If somebody's being paternalistic to you, if your friend is being paternalistic, what are they doing?
It could probably be like micromanaging,
Micromanaging, right? Telling you what to do, telling you what you can't do. You're not going out with that boy, Sandra. You can't go. I forbid you. Right? They're taking some sort of place of authority, telling you how to live your life. This is generally what it means to be paternalistic. It's telling someone how to live their life, telling them what they can and cannot do. There's an aspect of parenting that necessarily involves that, right? Because kids don't know any better. They don't know it's not smart to try to swallow 6 pieces of bubble gum, right? So you forbid them from doing that. But caring is not the same as just telling other people what to do, telling them what they can or can't do, trying to micromanage their life. Rather, what it means to care for someone is not only to meet their needs, but to promote their interests and their desires. Caring for someone means being responsive to people's psychological, physical, cultural, and spiritual needs. It's not just caring for their physical needs. It's not just caring for their emotional well-being. It's trying to be responsive to all the needs that a person has and showing up in the ways that we can to help meet those needs to the degree to which we are responsible for them. Bless you.
Thank you.
It's not just making food for your child. It's not just holding your friend's hand when they're sad, if they're also starving, right? It is trying to be responsive to and meet all of their needs the best way that you can with the resources that you have available, right? The ethicists of care are not saying stretch yourself so thin that there's nothing left for you to take care of yourself, but to show up in the ways that we can, which they think a lot of people are not doing. They're not doing the best that they could be doing with the resources they have available to them. Held describes this view as more receptive intuitive than objective analytic. What do you think this means? What do you think this means? Receptive intuitive. More receptive intuitive than objective analytic. If there's the thinker we've looked at so far that was objective analytic, who would it be? Kant. Right? He's trying to determine this universal abstract moral rule that you just apply in every situation. He's taking a very objective, rational stance on things, analyzing the concepts logically. That is not the flavor that care takes on. Care doesn't embody a neutral, objective standpoint. It's not just about analyzing logically the situation and doing what's rational to do, although this plays a small role. It's more about being receptive to the person, listening to them, being sensitive to the particulars of the situation, being sensitive to the emotions that come up. In this way, it's more intuitive in its approach in dealing with people. Not just trying to be rational and neutral and objective all the time, but intuiting what the emotion the person is feeling, intuitively responding to them. It's good to think before you speak, obviously, but being rational and logical 100% of the time is not going to be the priority in a caring relationship, right? We joked about this in one of the last lectures in this class, right? A common relationship trope between men and women is sometimes a woman will be wanting to share her feelings and express how she's feeling on the inside, and the guy just wants to apply a solution to the problem, right? And doesn't want to empathize with her situation. That kind of just, here's the solution to your problem, would be objective analytic, right? It's taking a rational, objective view of the situation, trying to fix it, rather than being receptive to what the person needs in that moment. Does that make sense? Finally, because it is a feminist theory, and because it utilizes systemic thinking, it's going to take stock of the privilege and lived experiences of people. Let's say you have a tech billionaire who's feeling really sad because his girlfriend broke up with him, versus your friend who is maybe lower to middle class, doesn't have a lot of money, maybe has a mental illness, and her boyfriend broke up with her. Who would you try to comfort first? Who would you comfort first? Your friend or the tech billionaire? Your friend, right? You have a deeper relationship with this person. You recognize that their lived experience matters, that there are things in life that they do not have because of their positionality in our social system. In this way, where we allocate care, according to the ethicist of care, is going to try to take stock of the privilege and lived experiences of people. If you have two people who, let's say two people, they both get mugged, separate instances though, and one doesn't seem very shaken up about the situation, but one does seem pretty shaken up and traumatized, the ethicist would say, all right, you care for that person first. It's obvious this experience has affected them more than this other person. In that way, it tries to take stock of the particulars of the situation, the privilege involved with the different, objects of immoral treatment, whoever has suffered immoral treatment. And it's going to try to integrate that kind of information in its moral analysis and then how it says we ought to carry out caring for people. In this way, it's very similar to progressive political theory, right? That does the same thing. That tries to take stock of the privileges people have in society and the lived experiences, especially of minority groups. All in all, if we were to summarize it, this is what we can say about the ethics of care. It focuses on attending to and meeting the needs of people, cultivating attentiveness to people's needs, trust in relationships. It tries to strengthen and deepen already existing relationships, and it places an emphasis on showing up for the relationships that we're in. Not just leaving people high and dry to fend for themselves, but showing up for the relationships that we're in with people. Thus, you could say the ethics of care focuses on cultivating and exercising attentiveness, trust, empathy, responsiveness to need, sensitivity to particular situations, and caring relations in general. In this way, we can provide kind of a neat definition of the ethics of care, like we've done for the other ethical theories we've looked at. The ethics of care is the view that the morality of an action is determined by the degree to which that action cares for others and deepens our relationships with them. But I must note that although we've framed this ethical theory like the first two we've looked at, providing a definition of what makes an action moral or immoral, that is not the ultimate goal of the ethics of care. The ethics of care isn't ultimately trying to tell us what makes an action moral or immoral. Like other progressive or feminist social philosophies, its primary goal is to change the world, to change the current social state of affairs, to create a society that is more caring. Telling us what makes an action moral or immoral is a part of that, but that's not its top priority. Does that make sense? It's trying to get us to see the ways in which care is lacking in society so that we can change it, ultimately. So that we can make society more caring. Doing our part in producing a state of affairs in which people actually get their needs met and they're cared for and they're loved. So, what do you think about this view? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Is anybody like, yeah, this view is the view, man. This is it right here. Nah, you're all like, I don't care. I don't care about this. Yeah.
I feel like it's the most similar to how people, like moral people, are already like live their lives, and this is just like explaining it.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
I don't know, just because you should care about people, and I feel like it's a moral thing. And I don't know, it's also a moral thing to have empathy for others.
Right.
And it's also kind of putting to words things that people already practice, like how you said about someone caring for their child as opposed to a stranger.
Right. Or their ailing grandparents, or their ailing parents, or people who are sick. Right? What else do you all think about this view? Is it perfect? Are there any issues with it?
Like, what if your parents suck and then they're old and they're like, will you please come to live in my house, take care of me, not put me in a home? Like, are you supposed to just take care of them because they're your parents, or shouldn't you just put them in a home?
What do y'all think? It's important that this theory frames it in that we should care for those to the degree to which we're responsible for them. Not we should care for those that we want to care for. Right? There's a distinction there. What should be done in that situation? Let's say your parents abused you when you were a kid, and now they're asking for help in their old age. What's the right thing to do there?
Get thrown home.
Just
Straight like
screw
that,
them.
yeah.
Screw them. Like, look, you didn't do much for me, you bucko. You're going in a home. Desert them. Abandon them.
But would the ethics of care go against that? Because you have to care for others and like, but like then she says that you have to like have this sense of self-care as well for yourself and then the other person. So I mean,
Right. That's a big thing. It's not just about caring for others, although that is a goal. You can't care for others if you don't care for yourself. Right?
and then another thing I saw interesting as well is like it kind of goes a lot against of what like Mill is saying, because I was studying him like all last night. You have to care about like whether a morality of an action produces like good consequences or bad consequences and stuff like that. Here it's just like you have to focus on like the sensitivity of that action, and like you put it into perspective. It was more objective, empirical, and analytic, while this was more like sensitive, feelings matter, and stuff like that. So
Right.
it's kind of good to see it from a feminist point of view, like seeing it like in an empirical way and then seeing it in a more sensitive feminist view and stuff like that. So I was kind of like putting the connections. She's pretty much saying like it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to like have feelings and like care for other people.
Right. Yeah, I think the selfish bit that you bring up, I connect to. It's not only okay, it's right to care for some people more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have what Peter Singer argues, another ethicist, the same moral obligation to help everybody. He thinks that you have the same moral obligation to help somebody in Africa as you do to your friend who's drowning right here. But this view doesn't believe that, right? This view says, no, the relationships that you have with people determine to a large degree what you should do for them and how to show up for them and the degree to which you help them out. Do y'all like that aspect of it? Or do you think, no, really, we all should have the same moral obligation to everybody? Is the partiality a virtue here?
So like, let's say you are walking down the street, your kid trips, and then there's this other guy who trips. Like, you've never met this man before in your life. Ethics of care would say, go take care of your kid first. But like, what if your kid has more privilege than the man who just fell? Like, what if he's like in a wheelchair and he just biffs it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough situation. You'd have to look at the particulars of the situation, right? That's a tough one, though, yeah. Or like, for example, let's say you want to spread care. You want to change society. Do you put your money and your effort behind causes for Native American people or for black people? Who should you help first? That's a hard question to answer, right? If you care about, social circumstances, it's not clear what the right answer is there. I guess we'd have to look at, the situations of the people, particular groups, particular communities. Do y'all feel like you have a good sense of what care means? What it means to care for someone? Or is that still a little murky? You feel like you got it?
I mean, after going on a roller coaster, within my sexuality and then relationships in general and being gay, it was just for me, I can genuinely understand care. Like, for example, me and my girlfriend were having an argument about me getting mad at her when she's trying to express her feelings, and it was just I have to understand that she comes from a background where she has had an abusive relationship in the past, and that you have to be able to care about that. At most, put your privilege to the side and be hey, let's talk about it in a way that we can both benefit from it, and we can both communicate the ethics of care is talking about. Let's benefit each other by communicating instead of being objective and articulate and ignoring the main focus in the room and stuff like that. So I mean, I feel like I have a general sense of what care is, but at the same time, I am still 18 years old. I'm still very young, so I still have a lot to learn, but I can genuinely say I feel like I have a good concept of what care is.
Okay. Do you all feel the same way? Or do you have trouble determining how to care best for a person? Yeah.
I think I would go with sometimes I have trouble showing care because sometimes when someone's feeling down and it's something personally happened bad to them, I sometimes don't even know how to comfort them or show my care for them.
Right. I feel like I'm in that situation too sometimes. It's not easy to determine what the best way to care for someone would be, especially if it involves hurting their feelings, right? My dad is a smoker. What is the best way for me to care for him knowing that smoking raises his risk of having all these diseases? Is it stealing his cigarettes? Is it trying to convince him not to smoke? Is it trying to manipulate him emotionally? so that he can live longer because that's best for him and that's best for me. He can stick around. Eventually he can meet his grandkids. What's the best way to care for someone in like a situation like that? Or if somebody has a mental illness that they know about that's ruining their life, but that they refuse to seek help for. What's the best way to care for someone like that?
I feel like that brings in the you're allowed to be selfish kind of part, because if they're allowed to not care about themselves, then I feel like you don't have a direct obligation to make them see that. Like, that is so much work and effort to take care of somebody who's not ready to be cared for.
Right. I mean, you can't help people who don't have some sort of inner desire to help themselves, right? You can try your best. You can set up situations for them in a certain way, but ultimately the desire to change has to come from within, right, in order to be lasting and permanent. But it's very difficult because a lot of people nowadays are struggling with mental illness, and it's not clear how best to help them, how best to care for them, or how best to care for yourself, right? I bet there are a lot of people here who have issues with doing that. I certainly do. What would be caring for me is that I exercise daily. Do I do that? No. What would be caring for me is if I didn't drink so much craft beer, right? But I really like craft beer, But that's not good for me, right? My liver isn't going to be very happy about that. Maybe my long-term health, is going to suffer. But it tastes good and I like it. Makes me feel nice. So I think caring for yourself and caring for someone, not only can it be confusing sometimes, it can also be really difficult. It doesn't involve just listening to someone, right? It involves actual effort. It involves actual emotion, actual empathy. But do you all like this view broadly? Is it better than the other ethical theories we've looked at, or do you prefer one of those instead? What about virtue theory? You like virtue theory better than this, or this better than virtue theory? Yeah.
I mean, I prefer this one because I feel like the other one was very like I said last class, I was like very like stuck up and like I don't know, I just wasn't vibing with it. It was just I don't know. I felt like it was like a put me on a pedestal type thing. This one is more as just like I see this one as a bit more humble than the rest of the other ones, to say the least.
Okay. What do the rest of you think? Have we found our theory at last? The one that we should all follow? The one that's the best? Let me ask you this question. Do you think we would need to engage so much in care if more people followed virtue theory? What if everybody was constantly working on improving and perfecting themselves and strengthening themselves and processing their emotional trauma, doing their shadow work? How much would we have to worry about caring for other people? Is that a problem for this view? I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about, though, right? Let's talk about what kind of implications this analysis has for society. And what Held has to say about the current state of Western society, and American society more specifically. As I noted near the beginning of the lecture, the ethics of care contains a scathing critique of contemporary society because of its lack of care and because of the lack of systems in place that care for individuals and help them meet their needs. What do you think the ethicists of care are going to say about societal relations? Is our current society based largely on an ethics of care? What do you think? Is our top priority as a society showing up for people, meeting their needs, and caring for them? No?
No.
What do you think the top priority is? Or what are people doing? If they're not caring for people, what are they doing instead? To put it in a slightly different way, if our society isn't pointed, not aimed at caring, what is it aimed at? What are people doing? Yeah.
Probably like trying to care for themselves and live a happy life.
Live a happy life, right. What's involved in that? What do you need for a happy life? Do you know what I'm thinking?
I don't know what you're thinking, but I know what I'm thinking.
What are you thinking?
I mean, if you're like, it depends, like, again, where you align into a certain, like, ideology or belief. I feel like someone who's, like, kind of, like, privileged would probably would think, like, money, happiness, maybe lots of sex, women, or men, whatever you prefer, non-binary, etc. I mean, I feel like that would be, like, their main goal, to be successful, like, and stuff like that.
Right. Right. I like the first thing that you said. Our society doesn't seem to be based so much around care as it does money. Right? You got to get on that grind. You got to make that money. Right? That money's going to get you far. Other people, I'll help them if they help me. Right? Isn't that kind of the attitude a lot of people take in society? A lot of CEOs, people who trade stocks. Money seems to be a pretty high priority on the list, as opposed to caring for others, especially strangers. Right? Currently, the ethics of care is going to say our social relations are not based on an ethics of care, fundamentally. As I alluded to in my comments just now, a lot of relationships nowadays aren't based on care, they're contractual. What do I mean by that? What does it mean to say a relationship is contractual? Yeah.
I think it's based on what each partner provides in the relationship.
Right. Right. There's some sort of expectation of, I'll do this for you, you'll do this for me. Right? And we're having an exchange. We are two kind of objective, self-interested parties coming together to exchange resources or to exchange opportunity. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, right? I'll do this for you if you do this for me. This is kind of how our relationships go in society. This is how your relationship is with the cashier at Target, right? I'll give you some interesting small talk. You bring out my items so I can get the hell out of here. Right? Or the people at the grocery store, right? I won't bother you, you don't bother me. Stay over there. I don't really care about you. I'm not going to talk to you. Right? Just don't get in my way. I'm having a moment. I don't even want to. Right? They're not based on expressing love and care for people. A lot of relationships nowadays, a lot of social systems nowadays, seem to be based on economic goals. Right? Means and ends. The expectation of a return on your investment. Right? Not freely giving, not freely caring, not gifting people things. What the ethics of care wants us to realize is that we can make society a lot better if instead of holding these expectations, if instead of forming contractual relationships, we formed actual, real, loving, caring relationships with people. We actually showed an interest in them. We actually listened to them. We actually have conversations with them. We try to meet their needs the best that we can. And so in that vein, the ethics of care attempts to cultivate flourishing relationships. And it prescribes that we do that. It wants to see society transformed from prioritizing economic to human concerns. Because they see relationships as the bedrock of society and how society actually gets things done and how it functions. If there is a rot at the center of our relationships, there's going to be a rot in society. Now, the difficulty with this is manifold. What would trying to do this imply about the way that we currently do things? What would we need to change? What would we need to do? Anybody have any ideas? No one? No one knows how we could make society more caring? What would we have to do if we wanted to get this done? Or what would that imply about the nature of our society? Yeah.
Just make people listen more.
Make people listen more, right? We would have to transform the way that we interact with other people, the way that others interact with others, right? What else? Yeah.
I actually don't think it's possible.
You don't think it's possible? Okay. Say why.
Because I feel like if you try to incentivize or like try to push people to become more caring, they either won't do it or they will do it for that reward that you incentivize being more caring for.
So you're pessimistic about the idea of transforming society to one that's based on an ethics of care. You're like, that's not very realistic. It's nice, but yeah.
Yeah, kind of like what he said. I don't think you could transform our society like today that we live in, because if somebody does something, they want something in return. Just like caring for someone or like being a nice person, they're not getting anything in return, so no one's gonna do that.
Were you going to say the same thing?
Yeah, just like a lot of people are more like materialistic nowadays.
I mean, okay, so, is it like, so, I'm trying to get my thoughts together, but like, is it like, for like the ethics of care, is it like more like about finding that non-contractual love, or just like just relationships in general?
Love is great. Hopefully everybody finds love if that's what they want. But the focus is on showing up in your relationships, not falling in love.
Okay, then you probably not. No, I don't think so. I genuinely think, as much as I want to have hope, because this kind of plays into the field that I want to go into in the future, I do not think that we will ever come to the consensus of like having an ethics for like caring for another one. Everyone wants to do what they want to do. They want to be selfish, which is okay. But at the end of the day, you know, I feel like it's true. Like no matter how much hope you might have about a situation, I don't feel like maybe half of the population might be, but I don't think like the entire everyone will be caring. No.
We're circling around the main point that I wanted to make here, that the ethicists of care make, which is if we were actually going to create a society that was based on an ethics of care, if we were actually going to transform society as we know it, it would require drastically changing our society's priorities and its institutions. And as a lot of you have expressed, you have reservations about that being a real possibility, right? Instituting ethics of care would require a drastic change in society's priorities and its institutions and its members, right? Held talks about this near the end of the piece. Let me just paint a picture of what the ethicists of care envision. What could be possible for society if we all got on board? Or if most of us got on board? Or maybe just some people in positions of power and authority. Instead of seeing the corporate sector and military strength and government and law as the most important segments of society, deserving the highest levels of wealth and power, a caring society might see the tasks of bringing up children, educating its members, meeting the needs of all, achieving peace, and treasuring the environment, and doing these in the best ways possible to be those to which the greatest social efforts of all should be devoted. One can recognize that something comparable to legal restraints and police enforcement, including at a global level, may always be necessary for special cases, but also that caring societies would greatly decrease the need for them. The social changes a focus on care would require would be as profound as can be imagined. Well, she certainly paints a nice picture of it, right? Of course, like any ethic, like utilitarianism, like deontology, like virtue ethics, there's always going to be a problem trying to orient society towards any one of these particular views, right? So I don't think this challenge is faced by the ethics of care alone. Does anybody have any questions about the ethics of care what it implies, what it says makes an action moral or immoral? Or do y'all feel pretty good about it?
First time I felt it.
For the first time, good. Okay, well, I'll let y'all go then.